Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. This is Andrew Turner. I'm the co-organiser of London Test Automation and DevOps, and welcome to this session, which is going to be called You Should Be Testing in Production. So thanks for joining. We've got some amazing speakers today. We're going to be joining the live panel in a second. A bit of logistics in relation to tonight. Just 1 second, got some more people joining. So the agenda for today, we're going to go through webinar logistics initially, just explain a bit about the community we've been building over the last number of years. Then I'm going to introduce our speakers. Then we're going to jump into the speaker panel. And then, assuming we've got enough time, we'll also do an open Q&A, which is the plan. And then do a quick wrap up and jump into what's next, because we've got another event coming up before Christmas. Or before the end of December, which is exciting as well. So in terms of webinar logistics, as I said, we're going to be, as you're probably aware, we're using Zoom. So we're actually recording this episode today, or today's session. We'd ask you to all remain on mute, if that's okay, apart from myself and the speakers. But you can obviously submit your questions through chat. So we can cover that towards that's one of the buttons at the bottom of the screen. And obviously look forward to you participating and giving us your input on today's session. So the original community that we built here, we've now got over 3,000 members. Shashi Jagtap, who you probably may know, or hopefully know, he's quite a character. He originally founded the group many years ago, and then a couple of years ago, I actually started getting involved in supporting Shashi behind the curtain, you could say, with speakers and logistics, etc. Shashi then joined a place called Apple, who you may have heard of, and so he now is not really actively as involved as he was before. But I'm obviously taking up the mantle and obviously moving the group forward. Which is great stuff. And traditionally, we used to do 3 or 4 events per year in and around the London area, physical events. This year, we've moved to online. We've done 3. This is the 3rd event this year, so I've done 4 online events by the end of the year. And we're always looking for great speakers. So we've got some great speakers today on the live panel. But obviously, if you're interested in speaking, then please let me know, and we can have a chat about that as a future 2021 plan. So when we were talking about this, setting up this today's session, I was actually just looking around at some really interesting diagrams. And for the probably people who are aware of this topic in this area, you may have come across this diagram before. It's been architectured by a guy called Adrian Cockcroft, who spent a long time at Sun Microsystems and then joined a place called eBay. And then also spent over 6 years, nearly 7 years at Netflix. And he's now the VP of Cloud Architecture for Amazon AWS, Amazon Web Services. So it's got some people joining now. And so, when you're architecting systems, you obviously get into this thing where you're trying to keep it simple. But the actual the kind of ball of wool on the right-hand side is actually what you end up with this kind of microservices architecture. And the next slide then shows you some quite famous organizations, Netflix, as you can see, Amazon, Twitter, and some kind of social network that you may have heard of in the bottom right, about what that plays out with in a production environment. So, how do you test this type of environment? And that's the kind of topic we're going to talk about today. So in terms of how do we move on to this, into the live panel, let's get straight into the live panel. So our first speaker is Talia. So welcome, Talia, and great to have you here.
Thank you. So I'm Talia. I'm a developer advocate at Split, and I work with developers globally to increase efficiency of their testing and feature delivery. So day to day, I do like code tutorials and like video tutorials and like show people like how to build. fun things. And so Split is a feature delivery platform where you can manage, monitor, and experiment your features, and from that create like a bigger impact for your user base. And I will kick it to Shelby to introduce her.
Thanks, Talia. That's a great intro. Shelby?
Hi, I'm Shelby Spees. I'm a developer advocate at Honeycomb. And at Honeycomb, it's a developer tool that allows you to observe your code in production and observe your systems in production and really learn from that meaningful telemetry data, that system health data that you're sending. And so Honeycomb's backend supports high cardinality querying, supports distributed tracing, and the UI makes it very easy to jump in and start asking novel questions. And my work at Honeycomb involves a lot of talking directly to users. I hold office hours where I can answer questions about, whether you're just learning about observability for the first time, or whether you're deep into your observability journey, how to get to that next step. And I also help run the blog and the podcast that we help host on HeavyBit, and I also help work on our documentation.
Fantastic. So I think we're going to, given the timing, I think what we're going to do now is just stop sharing and jump straight into, we've got John here. Hi, John. We're going to jump straight into the live panel. John, do you just want to go on put your video off? Is that all right? Is that possible? That's great. Thank you. So I suppose to kick off the session, when we talk about testing in production, I suppose, my kind of mind when we talked about that as a topic was kind of, it sounds a bit scary to me. It sounds a bit provocative. It sounds a bit, testing in production, is that really, really possible? So I suppose my first question is what's your thoughts on that? What's the backstory and the origins of testing in production? What's your perspective on that, Talia?
I think it comes from a place of like frustration with staging environments, and like I used to be a test engineer, so I was in QA and testing and automation for a few years, and it would be so frustrating when you test something in staging and it works perfectly, and then you ship it to production and it breaks. So I think this need of testing in production comes out of like, okay, well, we don't have to do things the way that people did them 20, 30 years ago. We have like new practices and new tools that allow us to do more innovative testing processes. And it really solves that problem of like this difference between staging and production. And it just like makes your life easier because that your features are working in the environment that they'll live, not in like this dummy environment.
So what you're saying is that they kind of like, normally you'd have like dev test, UAT, dev test pre-prod and then prod. But the issue was keeping those in sync, and you kind of never had the right data set in production. Yeah,
your staging environment and your UAT and your pre-prod and your beta, like they're never going to be the same as production. So just test and prod.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, like, we didn't always used to have staging environments. We didn't always used to have test environments. It used to be like the one sysadmin who would go in and hand edit files on the production server, right? That's like, sometime for some people, maybe that was a long time ago. For other people, maybe it wasn't that long ago. And we used to have a very, very tight feedback loop in terms of, I make this small change over here and I can see, I just took down the server, let me undo that. But now we have all these layers between a code change and seeing the impact of that change in production. And that's where both observability and feature flagging can come in, as well as things like improved build processes. All of these modern practices can help you improve that feedback loop. But the thing about this session's title is we said, like, you should be testing in production, and that's 100% true. And I think there's also something else that's true, is that you are already testing in production. it's just you're not learning from it. You're not getting any benefit out of it. So you're taking all these risks. Every time there's a deploy, you hold your breath and cross your fingers and hope you don't take down your system, because everything that you test individually in your build process or in your development environment or your staging, have you ever had to like try to reproduce a production only bug in staging? And sometimes it can take like days or weeks, or you're never able to reproduce it. And so people are complaining. Right. Like people are complaining or people are having a bad experience and you can't fix it. And so that's why it's important to have this feedback loop from your production environment and be intentional about the testing that you're already doing.
Yeah, because I mean, normally you'd have a set of tests that you do, in the pre-production environment, and you hope the data set was the same in both environments. But what you're saying is there's kind of like this breakage that happens as you try and increase the velocity of your releases. It starts to amplify this problem, this kind of disconnect. Is that what you see?
Mm-hmm.
Seeing?
Yeah, and the other thing is we the last decade we've talked a lot about velocity in release engineering, but it doesn't make sense to speed up our releases if we're not actually seeing the impact of that. We're just you're shipping shit faster, but it's still shit that you're shipping, and I think that's where like I saw this amazing demo the other day from Yaz over at Launch Darkly, but it's such a good example of like how feature flagging really makes a huge impact, whether you're using Split or Launch Darkly or your hand-rolled configuration. Being able to roll out your code and limit that to only, you, the developer, or you, the tester, can say like, I want to test this particular code path, and then nobody else in your production, your main users don't have to see it.
Yeah, so you can kind of have this kind of, I suppose, it's a bit like A/B testing, isn't it? It's a bit like you can test this path and you can test this path, and you can see which ones land smoothly. Yeah. It's interesting. So, yeah. I mean, what? Sorry, go on.
Oh, I was going to say, and you can roll out changes on like half your traffic, or you can roll out on like 1% of your traffic, or like a canary sort of thing. And that's where separating your deploys from your releases becomes a core part of this.
Mm. So I suppose, I mean, one of the things I was just thinking about was when you were talking was that, I mean, it's literally a couple of months ago, I was talking to Dave Farley, who obviously is the one of the fathers of continuous delivery, the ex-ThoughtWorks guru, and it's 10 years since that book was written, and obviously, if you look at the diagrams that I showed at the beginning with the Death Stars that they call them, I presume that proliferation in kind of microservices started to amplify the problem. Because a lot of applications we think about 10 years ago, 5 years ago even, were maybe quite monolithic in nature. Is that what you've seen as also a phenomenon that started to create this issue about you have to move the testing into a production environment because you just can't have simulate that whole Death Star in production, in pre-production, etc., etc. You don't have the infrastructure to do that.
Mm-hmm. And I've worked on teams that tried to mimic production in our staging environment, in our QA environment, and it becomes, especially for like small, medium businesses, it becomes it's not a good use of your time as engineers to try and mimic your entire production environment and host all of that infrastructure in parallel. It's so expensive, both for your engineers and just as infrastructure costs. To run out those cloud services and then try to simulate production traffic, which you're never going to do with any level of accuracy, right? Users are the ultimate agents of chaos. And so this is where, people in the chaos engineering community, people like Nora Jones and Casey Rosenthal are proposing sort of the next stage, or the next era of continuous delivery is called continuous verification, where you're not just trying to like I said, the ship faster. You ship things and then you actually observe that change and you verify that it works the way as it's intended not just in your QA environment where your testers have access to, but also in your production environment where it's going to have a real impact on users. And I'm sure Talia can say a lot about that.
Yeah, totally. So first, I think I think her name was going to come up anyway, but Charity Majors, who's the CTO at Honeycomb, like obviously she is like a big advocate for testing in prod, and she's, if you haven't seen her talk, like look her up. But
you definitely remember it. You definitely remember Charity if you saw her on stage. Yeah.
Yeah, you'll remember. She's great and she's passionate and she's right. But yeah, so she's one of the major advocates. And also I agree with what Shelby was saying about, like, it doesn't make sense to put so much effort into your staging environments to make them work like production. Like, you already have production. And if you're testing safely, like with, all the stuff we'll talk about today, if you're, using feature flags and canary releases and, starting small and then growing bigger, like there's steps that you can take to make sure that you don't, break shit in production. And if you do, that it'll be like within this bubble. So it just doesn't make sense to spend all that money and time to make sure your staging works like production when you have production.
So I was just asking a quick question. So I know the origin of Charity Majors was obviously at Facebook. She was running like monitoring and production, wasn't she, at Facebook? And I believe that the story was that's why she had those such big challenges there that she created Honeycomb. Yeah. I suppose my question to Talia was about Split and feature flags, and what was the origin story for Split? Why did that get created as a business?
Yeah, so Split was created by 3 guys who came from, I believe, Salesforce IQ, and they basically, at one of our founders, Otto, at every company that he worked at, he built a feature flagging system for them. And he thought, if this is what people need and this is what companies are using nowadays, and this is what I'm being asked to do, like maybe it's something that like more companies could benefit from. And so because he built it so many times for other companies, he was able to, work with these 2 other guys, Trevor and Pato, and build Split.
Okay, that's great. Nice. So there is this kind of thing where you if you build it once and then many people can benefit from it. That's the idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like supply and demand. Like obviously, like feature flags are like super in demand, especially now with like the ever-changing like agile ecosystem.
Yeah, and this is actually a very common pattern. Like Lightstep was founded by ex-Googlers who got very used to using Dapper for distributed tracing. Honeycomb was founded by a lot of ex-Facebook people who got very comfortable using Scuba for high-cardinality querying. And it's engineers who in these big companies that can afford to build out these amazing systems, then go on to move on to smaller shops and are like, oh my gosh, how do you accomplish anything? Even if you don't work at Google or Facebook or Microsoft, you still deserve to have tooling that serves your business's needs, and you shouldn't have to roll your own observability backend or roll your own feature flag configuration tooling in order to have these modern practices. And so it's really just like trying to democratize that for people outside of these big companies that can just host their own infrastructure that way.
Yeah, I mean, It's a bit like the Casey stuff, isn't it? With the stuff that he did with continuous delivery, continuous verification with Verica that he now created. He's then trying to democratize that with that platform. So it's just like giving back. Yeah, it's
important also like to just like trust the experts. Like I'm not an expert in observability, but like the people at Honeycomb, like they know what they're doing. Like the people who built Split, like they obviously know feature flags. So it's one thing to like build like a very simple like on-off switch for a feature toggle, but it's another thing to like have the depth of metrics and data and analysis that like the founders created and our team has been creating. So I would just say like trust the experts, like if you're looking for a third party.
Mm-hmm. The build versus buy argument often comes down to, when you can pay a third party service to manage, who are the experts, right? It's Split's full-time job to do feature flagging well. It's Honeycomb's full-time job to do observability well. Then that allows you to just focus on the core parts of your business, and I think that's really, really important for engineers at small and medium businesses, especially. Is you don't want to get bogged down in building out your own observability platform because you just don't have the time. You're trying to serve customers.
Yeah, I mean, it depends how big your engineering team is. Otherwise, your backlog just never gets reduced, does it?
Mm-hmm.
I was actually just going to kind of start to work through because we've got quite a few questions on the chat. So Ivan's the first one. I think Ivan, do you want to come off mute and ask the question, Ivan? So I think you got something about critical bugs. Ivan, are you there? Do you want a hand?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, is that Ivan? Hi, Ivan.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah. So, just a quick question. What then happens if you come across a critical bug in production? What happens to your production environment? Does that what do you then do?
So,
Talia, do you want to take this?
Yeah. So basically, there's like I said, if you're using the right tools, you can kind of mitigate this risk. So obviously, testing in production comes with risks if you're not doing it safely. So with using feature flags, so like think of a feature flag as kind of like a bubble, and you create this bubble in the UI, and then you target your internal teammates. So this is like your developers, your QA, your product, everyone who has to have access to the feature will be targeted in the flag. And then your developers will deploy the code for a specific feature inside of that feature flag, and only they will have access to it. So if there's any bugs, if anything goes wrong, it's only going to affect those people who are targeted, and it's not going to affect your end users. And this process is also called like dog fooding. So then once you know that it's working and it's working in production with those users, then you turn on the feature flag already knowing that your feature works and you didn't break anything that was existing. And then the other thing on top of that you can do is a canary release or a percentage rollout, where you roll out your feature to like a small subset of users, 1%, 5%, make sure it works for them. And then increment it slowly as your confidence increases. So I think between like feature flags and using a canary release, you're kind of mitigating that risk. And then once you're in the release process, you can use observability tools like Honeycomb to make sure that like if shit happens, you're covered.
Yeah, and one thing I just want to chime in a little bit. We're not saying to throw out all your unit tests or all your, functional testing or your CI tooling that you've worked so hard to build, but we're saying to proactively, or strategically, roll out changes in production in stages, and then also observe those changes as they roll out. Because, wow, I totally lost the point I was going to make there. But so it's just be strategic about it, right? That's the thing I was going to say is especially with modern distributed systems, a lot of the testing that the test strategies that we've developed over the last few decades no longer help us because they only test the individual components. And we've gotten really good at solving the problems in individual components. But when those individual components, especially with microservices, roll out to production and they start interacting with each other or start interacting with external, third-party APIs or your, database, you start to, or just, users being users, you start to run into these emergent failure modes that we can no longer predict and write tests for ahead of time. And that's where it's really important to plan ahead and observe that. And then when you see those emergent failure modes, those emergent bugs in production, then you can respond quickly with, turning off that feature flag. And I think someone else asked around, do you leave those feature flags in forever or do you remove them? it's like, once you're confident about that code in production, you do go ahead and remove it, and it's part of your ticket for that feature, right? You don't close a ticket until you create a new ticket for removing the feature flag.
Yeah. It kind of raises some new ways of working as well, doesn't it? And you can kind of move it in that kind of environment. So, John, I know I asked John to go off video. I think John should come back on video now to do his question. So, John Feasy, do you want to come back on video and audio to ask the question of Shelby and Talia?
Yeah, I can.
Welcome back, John. Welcome
back. Hello. It's quite an oddity to be told to turn off. I think actually you've covered most of my questions in your previous answers. I'm assuming automated confirmation testing and things like that would still be valid. But as you've indicated, you'd do it through dog fooding, so you'd have a feature turned on for your particular domain, for example, and you've already answered my question about removing feature flags over a period of time. Just looking down my list of questions that I'd already typed. So I'm assuming for that particular feature, you would enable additional logging, so you could capture user actions, and you would enhance those. So what sort of things would you look out for in your logs?
And this is actually where observability comes in. The definition of observability for software is being able to ask new questions of your logging data, of your telemetry data, without shipping new instrumentation, without adding new log lines or new metrics lines, stats-D or Prometheus sort of metrics to your code, because you necessarily can't predict what these emergent failure modes are going to be, and so we promote using structured logging or structured events, which sort of combine your structured logs where you have like key value pairs. You say like, this user ID or this this Kubernetes pod or this this like HTTP endpoint. I want to be able to slice and dice by those sorts of values as either the engineer or the tester validating these changes. And so you just sort of, there's tools, there's frameworks that automatically do that for a lot of just sort of basic stuff out there. And then you can also add your custom fields that you might care about that's very specific to your business logic. And so that's where we talk about observability-driven development. When me as the engineer, I'm like, okay, well, what, would this ever come up? Let me just go ahead and slap that in and send that to my observability tool, so that later on I might be able to ask a question about this particular, intersection of data, even if I don't, versus, I don't know if you've ever tried to use like metrics for anything with increasing cardinality, right? Like if you're trying to have compare metrics between two different build IDs, well, build ID is an exponential or like forever increasing, right? And so you get a separate graph for each one, and it's impossible to compare things over time. Or if you want build ID and customer, number, and then it starts to pollute your code with that, versus with structured data, you can say like, just include this as a key value pair, and then later on we start to slice and dice in new ways. And then that also combines, because structured events have like your start time and duration of each like chunk of work. You can build that into traces across your systems. And what we've seen for a lot of people is that, you start using distributed tracing or even just tracing on one service, and you learn so much about like things you had no idea what was going on in your code, and in your services and how they interact. It's like, whoa, we have an N+1 query here that is very, very hard to find in traditional logging and traditional metrics. And so instead of like, you see a little wiggle on your dashboard over here, and you're like, okay, let me match that timestamp over here to my logging tool and do some, queries, and you run the query and you go get coffee and come back and it's still running. It's like, no, like you don't have to work that way anymore. Have your the numerical data, the time series data, and your relevant like contextual data in one place.
Yep.
that's what that looks like.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you.
Thanks for joining the session.
Yeah, great question.
So I was just before we want to move on to Scott. It was the next question. I was going to ask about Talia's dog. We had a new panel member there for a second.
He got bored with me and ran away.
So Scott, are you there? Do you want to join the live panel and ask a question around security? Are you there? Scott R. You switch your video on and you come off audio, you can ask the question to Shelby and Talia.
I don't see Scott on the...
He dropped off.
He might have dropped off, yeah.
Okay. So Dennis Cheklov. Are you there, Dennis?
Can you hear me?
We can. Hi, Dennis. Good evening.
Yeah. Good evening. Yeah, thank you.
Oh. You there, Dennis?
Cut off.
Okay. Rajendra Singh, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
Hi, Rajendra. Good evening.
Good evening. My question was I understand the production testing, but my question was how we are going to test financial transactions, if say I'm booking hotel or checkout and making payment, and either I'm buying some item, and or some kind of applications I worked where we have to do the production testing, but within hours we had to delete the data because otherwise that data will be shown in the report, and that report was very crucial. So do you have any thought on such kind of the applications testing on the production?
Yeah, so basically what you would do is you have test entities that are in production that are marked as test objects in prod. So something you could do is have a Boolean, something that says is test equals true, or is test object equals true, linked to each test object in production. So if you have a test hotel, or if you have a test user, you have a test thing in production, it's going to be marked with this Boolean. So everything that all the actions associated with it are going to be bucketed with this other this Boolean. So then in your dashboard, you can differentiate this is the data from my test step, and this is the data from my regular non-test users. So you can differentiate. And then if you're testing something like making a payment or checking something out, you just want to make sure that in your cleanup for that test that you refund that payment, or undo any actions that were related to that test.
I mean, for payment thing is sometimes it's not easy to get refund or something, and obviously for testing no one is going to use the credit card or debit card for that. So for me, it looks kind of impossible thing for detailed testing. We can really say can do £1 or few pound transactions for testing purpose, but not the big transactions. Not possible. And
you can create
dummy cars over there on the prod, right? That's not possible. So that's why I worked in the checkout. So of one.
Yeah.
So we had to do the major testing in the pre-prod environment, and we can't even think of there are some other options say authorization, authentication. We are able to do the prod testing, automate that, and the canary things. But for payment thing, still it looks seems not possible.
So it is possible. You can still test those flows in production. You would just have to create accounts that have more than 1 or 2 pounds in them to be able to test the transactions that you need. And this is where you can work with your IT people, and you can say I need accounts that can do this, and just work with them and figure out what exactly the requirements are. But I don't want you to think it's not possible, because it is.
Oh.
Shelby, do you have
Yeah. The other thing I would say is that it's also possible to safely and like securely observe real user behavior in production, even with sensitive data like financial data. We work with customers who have payment processing, like Goat, which is a shoe company, and so there are ways to safely do that, and also like sanitize your data. Sort of as the developer, it's your responsibility to make sure that either the telemetry data you're sending in order to observe it later on is safe. And so you can mark things as like, this is sensitive, please, it makes sure it's obscured or hashed or whatever, and that gets caught at the PR stage, at the code review stage, the same way that any other security data leaks would be caught at the PR stage and the securities. And so that's the other part of observability driven development is, thinking ahead, like even for something that's sensitive or needs to be secure, how am I going to make sure this is working correctly in production? Well, there's still ways to validate that, even if you don't have or you don't want access to people's, bank account numbers or social security numbers or, other PII.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like even John Feezy's kindly put a kind of response in the chat, a agenda that you might want to have a look at, because it's a bit like having stub data and segregation of data. I think you're talking about Talia and Shelby. Well, Dennis has come back now. He's come back from the clouds, and he's come back and joined the live panel. Dennis, are you there? Could you share your topic? Or your topic?
Sorry, I don't know if I got cut off.
You're back now. You're back now. Welcome.
Yeah, I'm back. until I realized I was cut off. It was a while. I think I have multiple questions. I don't know which one to start with, really. The one I ask about is, but maybe we should just discuss about the data which is being written, and there is no easy way to segregate it. Like, obviously, you can segregate it by user, but if the data is more general, I know, like, there's. I don't disagree that you should be testing in production. I just I'm thinking that the advices we kind of discussed so far, to me, sounds like general knowledge, so to speak. Is it that you should have logs, you should have observability, you should have special accounts you can log in with. But I guess my question is then about. Do the tests you do, like what kind of tests you actually do? Like, give us some kind of examples on top of what you already gave, and are they done on the event? Like, something is deployed and the feature flag is released to a certain user, and then the mass automated testing happens just for this user, and then we say, okay, this is good. Release the new next flag, or we're talking about more manual kind of intervention?
That was a long question.
Sorry, I usually talk a lot. I do apologize about it.
I think I can walk through like a scenario of how we dog food changes at Honeycomb. So a developer would release a feature change behind a feature flag, and we'll test that out we have 3 separate environments that all run the same build at the same time, but the feature flags are different between the environments. And so we use Honeycomb to observe our customers' behavior using Honeycomb, and so not everyone can do that exactly, but we can limit things to like only Honeycomb employees, or we can limit things to like my user Shelby at honeycomb.io, and then I can go and use my like practice team, and that's a very manual process, but it's one way to validate that, and you can also depending on. Honeycomb's also very much a UI tool, right? And so there's some things that's worth automating and some things that's just like not quite worth automating. If you're releasing features or breaking changes on an API, you as a developer have already probably, for local testing, and you as a tester have also, built some automation around testing that specific API endpoint. And so you could just run the same thing on that, feature flag turned on, like, specific test user in your production environment. And the value there is, it's all one build. You've confirmed that, your change didn't break the build, your change didn't break prod for existing, but it's just a code path that only your test user, only you, the developer, are going to see in the production environment.
Is that helpful, Dennis?
Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, so but again, traffic segregation over using user account and like literally creating a special session which is flowing through the system is like super important. So you can segregate your traffic from the rest of your traffic. What you said though there, if you have automated tests, would you test it with feature flag on and with feature flag off, or only with feature flag on just for this user? Or you would have two users, one which would not have feature flag, another which would, and you would have test different passes? Because you want to know, like, if you have to roll back this feature because you discovered something which actually doesn't work, you want to know that what you're rolling back to is actually still works. So my question is, do you test both cases with on and off or not?
Talia, that you?
I mean, yeah.
Yes.
Talia, go for it.
Yeah, the short answer is yes, you test both. Yeah.
There you go. Boom.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like a lot of this, we're putting on our like scientific method hats, where I, as the developer making the change, or I, as the tester testing this change, I have an hypothesis I have an idea of like, how should this code behave under different circumstances? And I want to test the control and the experimental. And that's exactly what you're saying is when we can automate that at scale, testing the control, testing the experimental, and that's sort of what the feature flags allow us to do.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dennis, for that one. That was a good one. So I think final question before we kind of wrap this kind of open Q&A was, I think, from Tom. I don't know if Tom is still there. I'm not sure what your comment means at the end about the guinea pig. So maybe you can qualify that for us and just explain.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, sorry, just checking. Yeah, maybe I'm ignorant of the tools that other people are working on here, Split and Honeycomb, but I'm just thinking maybe what I work on. You have a platform you sell to a customer. They pay thousands or millions of pounds a year for it to work for 24/7, 360 days of the year. And if you say, okay, I'm just going to turn on this flag here and turn on this feature here and let you effectively be the tester for it, and they then don't have service or they're without service for a period of time, that's possibly not going to be optimal from their perspective.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I guess maybe
it
depends on what you're working on. Yeah, sorry.
We're actually saying to do the opposite of that, right? If you release a change as part of your deployment, right? If you're running managed services or something, or even if you're running like on-prem hosted services, you want to test your change in the target environment before customers see it. And so we're just saying, hey, split off the traffic that sees this change instead of deploying to your entire production environment at once. And so this allows you to validate a change without impacting customers. And then once you've confirmed it on safe traffic, on testable traffic, then you can finally release it to the sort of the traffic that you want to be careful about, your big customers, and they can be the last people to get it. Unless you can have sort of a beta equals true, like Boolean, people who opt into your beta testing, and they see things first. This is just a whole lot of ways to be, like I said, to be strategic about where your changes are going, separate from your deployment process. Because what teams are seeing now is like maybe you're deploying 4 changes at once, and 3 of those changes are great, and then it turns out 1 is causing issues for customers, or has some sort of like ripple effect that affects people downstream. Like, wouldn't it be great to release each of those separately and confirm them all separately? And then when you try the 4th one and the alarms go off, well, let's just turn that feature flag back off, and we can go back and mitigate that without having to do an entire deploy rollback across all of your production hosts. So that's what we're saying is you're already testing in production every time you deploy a change. Now let's just do it intentionally.
Yeah. And like for most companies, like what's the first thing you do after you roll out a change to production? Like you go to production and you test it, right? Like you make sure that it works. So like Shelby said, like you're already doing it. So now we're just going to streamline the process and make it safe and, scale it.
But what about the regressions? If you only test the feature you just introduced, what about the feature which you introduced months ago? Who's going to test for that?
Yeah, so those should all be automated. And when you have this new feature that's deployed to prod behind the feature flag, you can still run those regression tests in prod with this new branch and make sure that it works, so that you didn't break anything existing.
Mm-hmm. And this is also where observability comes in, because even if your automated tests don't necessarily cover every single possible intersection of code paths, you can observe how that is in your dog food environment or on your production test users or your beta users, and you can see like, oh, people are starting to experience more latency. Like, let me see how that's related, and that answers sort of the where question of these emergent failure modes, is like, where is this happening, and so how do I where do I go to fix that? Because it's I mean, this is what we talk about with like exploding cardinality, right? If you try to multiply every possible combination of like things that can go wrong, now you're writing like billions of individual tests, and that kind of complexity is impossible to manage. And so just observing the reality of your runtime behavior is where it is really crucial for covering all of those potentialities.
So thank you for that. Thank you for those questions. We've actually had some other people join the session, so I think we've hopefully you enjoyed that bit where we actually get in direct input from the floor. Thank you, Talia. Thank you, Shelby, for that highly interactive session. And just before we take to the next session, I mean, in terms of contacting you, Shelby, and contacting you, Talia, as follow up, if anybody's on the session today, what's the best way of getting hold of you guys?
For me,
girls, not guys. Sorry, girls.
For me, I think it's Twitter. I'll post my Twitter handle on here if you want to follow me or message me. Okay. That's the best way to reach me.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic.
Yeah, same. I'm also very active on Twitter, or you can email me at shelby@honeycomb.io, and I'm happy to answer questions there.
Okay, fantastic. So that was the live panel. And so in terms of just wrapping up, that was the open Q&A as well. So that was good. We jumped straight in the live panel into the Q&A, which hopefully you found useful and valuable. In terms of speaker recommendations, one of the things I asked both Shelby and Talia to share with before we start today's session was to share some books and some links that would actually be helpful for people who want to know more about this topic. So I don't know, Shelby, could you maybe talk us through some of these books you've put up here as kind of key reading or some bedtime reading for the people on the session today?
Can I present my...
Sorry, yeah. Sorry, do you want to read your links first?
And then I'll let Shelby go. But these links that are on the bottom of our blog are just posts that I wrote about testing and prod and feature flags. If you've never used feature flags before, you can go to split.io and hit free account, and you can play with feature flags. So yeah, I have another event that I have to get to, but thank you so much, everybody, and hope to see you all on Twitter and soon.
Thank you for coming from Los Angeles, Talia. It's a pleasure to have you on this session.
Thank you.
Take care. So Shelby, thanks Talia for being on the panel. Thanks for sharing those links. So on the book side, I think you put forward these books as some bedtime reading.
Yeah. Although I'm, they are a little dense to be reading in bed. You might fall asleep too quickly, but at least I do. So I got to read them upright at my desk. But these 3 books, Chaos Engineering by Casey Rosenthal and Nora Jones, who I referenced earlier, they're part of the team that helped found Chaos Engineering as it's practiced at Netflix. And this is sort of the origin of the testing and production as a practice, or doing it intentionally, being experimental and being scientific about it. And so they're a fantastic group of people to read about and follow on Twitter. Nora Jones is also part of she helped found the resilience engineering community, which I think is just this beautiful intersection of all of us people who care about quality in the software services we're building, right? And so excellent people to learn from. This next one, Distributed Tracing and Practice, it's more software engineer focused and a little bit of infrastructure engineer focused, but I think there's a lot of value there for anyone who's working in distributed systems to learn about just why do we benefit from distributed tracing, and that's from Austin Parker and some of the folks over at Lightstep. And then observability engineering. If you have an O'Reilly or Safari account, you can go and look at the early release chapters. My colleagues Charity Majors and Liz Fong Jones are in the process of writing it, and I'm really excited for that to come out because it just talks about why observability, a lot of the things I just said, why observability is so important in modern software systems to get those answers to the novel questions, the ones we can't predict ahead of time.
Yeah, it's a pity the little bird there doesn't have pink and purple hair like Charity.
Yeah, you know what? Maybe I can put in a word and get that changed.
I'm sure O'Reilly wouldn't complain.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that. That's some great stuff to be shared, and hopefully you found that useful to follow up on that area. So what's next? So thank you again to Shelby and Talia for joining today's session. As I said, this is the 3rd session we've run this year. We had a bit of a break from May until today because obviously I think people probably have been doing online meetups probably every day for many, many hours. So we tried to and leave it a bit of a breather and come back in November. But we got some an interesting breakthrough in the last few weeks, and this is what we're going to be doing in December. So if anybody on this session has heard of a very useful tool called Jenkins, and you've probably heard of a thing called Jira. So Kashuki and Harpreet have now recently launched in the last 12 months a business called Launchable, and they are combining the areas of machine learning and AI with testing. So we've just agreed this week, literally, that they're going to come on a fireside chat with myself. And it's going to be an early Christmas present for you all who comes on the session. So we're going to do a fireside chat on the 16th of December, and we'll be publishing the details about, so you can get your tickets through Eventbrite and register for that session. And that's going to be at 5 p.m. So it's going to be at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon Eastern, and 5 p.m. London time on the 16th of December. So look forward to anybody that wants to come along to that session, because I think it's going to be a good one if you're interested in that area. And so I'm just going to say thank you for everybody for joining for us tonight and this afternoon and this morning in Shelby and Talia's case. It was nice to see Talia's window with the nice sunshine. It's very dark and cold and windy in London, But thanks very much for joining, and please keep safe, everybody, and enjoy your evening, enjoy your day, wherever you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.